Nowadays, in the Western world, we know that major cities trend politically to the left, while rural areas tend to be very conservative. This is generally true in other Western countries such as Canada and Germany, if you just take a look at their election maps. You see how urban and rural areas almost always vote very differently. However, what if I tell you that there are signs from the past two US elections that things are starting to change? Yo, what's up, guys? My name is the Conservative Geographer. So, you see, I pay a lot of attention to politics, but I am also just an amateur geographer who loves staring at maps. Here, although I have to say it, I have a lot of criticism for the New York Times for their outright biased reporting and sometimes unhinged opinions. I do have to give them a lot of credit for making this extremely detailed election map. The cool thing about their map is that you can click on every single precinct and county to see their election results, including percentage, vote count, and shift from the last election. Again, really not a big fan of the NYT, but great stuff nevertheless. In this video, allow me to build my analysis based on this interactive online map, as well as the exit poll that can be found on Wikipedia, because these numbers are important. In a past election, we know that every single state swung toward the Republicans, including the countryside, suburbs, and cities, you name it. However, when I first came across this beautiful New York Times maps 4 years ago, yes, I am talking about the 2020 election when President Trump lost, I had already noticed a very common theme. We know that suburbs throughout the country had shifted toward the Democrats in that year, frankly handing Joe Biden the presidency. However, the inner cities had already seen a red shift, anywhere from slightly to pretty significantly. So I don't believe this is just a temporary phenomenon. In other words, urban voters in 2024 didn't vote merely in response to how unpopular the past administration was. I would conclude that an American urban redshift has been taking place for a while, despite many people not noticing it yet. So why are cities trending to the right these days? Let's break it down.
Philadelphia arrested dozens of people last night after a violent looting spree, a growing problem around the country that's forcing many retailers to take drastic measures.
The first one comes up to mind has to be crime. While the Democratic Party agenda nowadays puts criminal justice and social work on a pedestal, the Republicans are the ones who consistently promote the old school, quote-unquote, tough on crime and back the blue approaches. Former Republican mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, he was known for bringing down crime in the city over a relatively short period of time in the 1990s. And since COVID, with homelessness and the looting of businesses on the rise, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement, obviously, urban residents are especially hard hit by these activities and are thus incentivized to support Republican policies instead. My second point is that the increased Republican appeal to young people, minorities, and immigrants. These are demographic groups that tend to concentrate in cities, while they traditionally one-sidedly supported the Democrats. Nowadays, however, if you look at the conservative movement, you might see that it has become a lot younger and more culturally diverse than ever, with people such as Vivek Ramaswamy, Candace Owens, and many former Democrats such as Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., and Elon Musk now as this movement's superstars. Also, according to exit polls from the 2024 election, young people between 18 and 29 are the age group that trended most heavily to the right, compared to the 2020 election. Okay, nowadays, we know that the conservatives are known for embracing color blindness and merit. They're obviously not the racist people, generally speaking. Like, I'm personally a minority, and I can attest to this. Okay, here we have the election exit poll again. All the minorities saw a shift toward the Republicans, especially Latinos being the strongest, with the 13%. That is a lot. Asians too, although to a lesser extent. Actually, if you look very closely, you see that white people are the only demographic group that became farther left, in the middle of a nationwide rightward swing. Isn't that just surprising and a little bit counterintuitive? Lastly, Trump is a very unusual candidate. His appeal to workers in the lower income class is higher than that of previous traditional Republicans. And then, urban centers have a large concentration of such demographic groups, while Trump and his allies have consistently tried to appeal to workers by promising to bring industrial jobs back, nowadays through tariffs. as well as to bring down inflation. Well, that was the historic context during the Biden administration. And I'm not an expert on economic policies, and you sure don't have to agree with Trump on all of his tariff madness. I'm just suggesting factors that might have contributed to the urban redshift. Yeah, in conclusion, I gotta say that presidential elections are a great way of showing people's political beliefs. And this past election has told us a lot of information, to say the least. By the way, if you've made it this far in the video, well, good for you. Please consider like and subscribe to my channel. I really appreciate it. Okay, it's time for case studies. Please bear with me. Let's dive in a bit deeper and look at the New York Times map of a few interesting cities.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Obviously, let's start with New York City. Traditionally, this city is very much dominated by the Democrats everywhere except Staten Island and South Brooklyn. However, starting in the 2020 election, we're seeing a citywide redshift. This redshift was further amplified in the past election. I mean, look at that. When I first came across this thing, I was absolutely shocked. The Bronx is a prominent black neighborhood. You also see a redshift in a few other ethnically black neighborhoods as well, although the magnitude is somewhat small, but I argue that the momentum is there. I think that the change of minds among African Americans is no coincidence. You see, with the rise of online political commentary in the past decade, I have seen many black influencers become so successful, who have frankly helped shape my political views since the 2020 BLM protests. Flushing, Queens is actually, if you don't know this is the largest Chinatown in the US. And this is a good manifestation of the Asian communities shifting to the right nationwide. Like, this is happening in almost every Chinatown in America. As an Asian myself, this redshift is simply very highly relevant to me. Williamsburg is a neighborhood with a large Orthodox Jewish population. I believe they one-sidedly backed Trump because they highly approved of his staunch support of Israel during his first term, although I do have some mixed feelings about them being single-issue voters to some extent. And finally, South Brooklyn. This is an area with a large Eastern European and also Orthodox Jewish population. We can conclude our findings that ethnic neighborhoods in New York City have seen some of the largest rightward change in the past 2 elections. Just keep that in mind. Next up, I want to talk about Miami, a city with roughly 70% of its population being Hispanic. The large Cuban population in this city has started to really embrace the GOP due to their historic anti-communist sentiments. You know, many of them left Cuba decades ago to escape political persecution. So, it's okay if you lean liberal. You can argue that the GOP, well, they leveraged that narrative really well to win over the Cuban votes. But you also have to admit that Miami was once just another urban Democratic stronghold. But Miami's amazing redshift started in the 2020 election. Then, the Miami-Dade County backed Republican Governor Ron DeSantis during the midterm election of 2022.
Well, thank you so much.
And then, this county went red again in the 2024 presidential election. So I can very confidently say that Miami is now the most Republican major city in America. Okay, for the last case study, I actually want to bring up Detroit, Michigan. We all know about Trump's great appeal to the blue collar in the Rust Belt, but here's a different perspective, hear me out. What is one minority group that we haven't discussed in this video so far? Yes, we know that Detroit is largely black, but it's also a very interesting case due to its large Arab and Muslim population concentrated in 2 areas, Dearborn and Hamtramck. These places historically were Democratic strongholds due to Muslim Americans' discontent over how George H.W. Bush handled the Middle East. I hate to say it, as I don't discriminate against anyone, but many of them are merely single-issue voters who only care about issues in the Middle East, in this case, Palestine, obviously. By the way, I do give Muslims credit for speaking up against the public school system for some of their LGBT agenda that had gone too far. Hamtramck's Muslim mayor also very passionately took the stage during a local Trump rally in 2024. But let's be honest, Michigan flipped Republican in the past election largely thanks to the Arab community's opposition to Joe Biden's stance on the Israel-Hamas war. They were frustrated about Israel's quote-unquote genocide and didn't turn out to vote for the Democrats. Here, You see, these two cities have basically become Republican enclaves in the Detroit area. However, if you take a look at these precinct results, yes, Trump beat Harris by a lot, but these Trump and Harris votes in Dearborn and Hamtramck don't nearly add up to 100%. Many of these votes were cast for the Green Party candidate Joe Stein, who was the only candidate who openly supported Palestine in this conflict. But still, Trump won these precincts because I'd argue that he is the best candidate who positioned himself as pro-peace. That's just my take. I'm starting to realize that this has become the longest video I've ever made, but there's so much more to talk about on this issue. Like, what about rural areas and suburbs? Everything covered so far, it seems like, are bad news for the Democrats, but what about caveats for the Republicans in this past election? Stay tuned, I will do another video on this exact topic. If you have watched this far, thanks so much. I'm no political science student, nor have I worked in the media, so if I've made any mistakes in this video, please don't hesitate to point it out by commenting below. Hope you enjoyed my analysis, and I will see you next time.